Gladiator 2 is the new 2024 historical action movie directed by Ridley Scott, and it's a follow-up to 2000's Gladiator. And I think the question on everyone's mind is this movie better? Well, yes, but not quite. This isn't a sequel like Blade Runner 2049, or Avatar: The Way of Water, or The Godfather 2, or Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, or The Dark Knight, where it improves on its predecessor. This isn't necessarily a bad thing for this film, it just simply doesn't do enough to stand out on its own. The first Gladiator film, in my honest opinion, is a bit overrated. It came out in 2000 and was kind of a throwback to the swords and sandals epics from decades prior, with big set pieces and large casts and extras and huge battle scenes and a historical backdrop. Gladiator was a monumental film upon its release, and it is odd, and probably has been on everyone's mind, that a sequel was greenlit just recently and earned the title Gladiator 2. It's just so much later that we're getting this movie when Gladiator came out 24 years ago. And probably the best stuff about this film is also what weakens it. It's a double-edged sword, no pun intended. Simply, the movie is a lot of fun. It's really well paced, the sets are great to look at, all the actors are fun, and they do a great job with their characters. All of the actors were great. Paul Mescal has this brutish energy, but also this commanding leading presence. Denzel Washington is just so manipulative and cunning and charming, and Pedro Pascal has this warmth, although this brutality as well. And the warmth is really something that gives him this great role as this empathetic general. And then Joseph Quinn and Fred Heckinger are both great in their insane ways. They both play a different type of insane. Joseph Quinn is more calculating, Fred Heckinger is just mad, and they do a great job. All the actors are great. There is this variety to the film, which really helps it, where you have a lot of different characters, all with different motives, which keeps the film fairly entertaining. Add to that fast-paced action and stakes constantly being heightened, and you have a good time at the movies. The film opens with Paul Mescal's Lucius. Now he goes by Hanno, and he lives with his wife on a simple farm in the early scenes before it's raided by Romans. And the invasion scene is pretty cool, in my opinion. It lets us know the scale the movie is operating on. There's a lot of notable CGI, which always seems to be a complaint with modern films, mostly big films. And it's impressive when it goes unnoticed, like in Avatar or Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. But honestly, the CGI here is not that bad because of the massive amount of real set pieces and the large scale here. It does feel like there are hundreds of extras, and the buildings they film in are real. It doesn't have that total immersion that a film like Dune has, but it's still pretty close in my opinion. You have this giant Colosseum, which was built to a near life-size replica in Malta, Spain, where they filmed this. You have real battle scenes filmed in an arena. They look great. It feels like you are really in a gladiatorial arena, which in a movie like this is exactly what you'd want to experience, because they actually built a replica of the Colosseum and shot action scenes in it. Most superhero films nowadays suffer from this lack of realism or grounded narrative. You can tell a fictional story or something that shouldn't really happen in real life, but in so many movies, the end results feel lifeless, like Captain Marvel or Madam Web, or even somewhat decent films like Black Panther: Wakanda Forever or Eternals. There's just this artificial factor to the visual design that's become so integral in movies nowadays. They're easier to shoot if they are on green screen, easier to edit and change in post, but they come off looking not real. I think it's why movies with grounded narratives like The Batman or The Dark Knight or even Pirates of the Caribbean at parts feel more real. They take real-life situations, a pirate on a sinking ship, Batman paragliding down into Hong Kong, the Joker blowing up a hospital and flipping a truck in the middle of Gotham, which is actually Chicago, and they turn it into real action, something that feels real and feels grounded. It adds this other emotional layer that most action tentpole movies don't have, and it's almost like a rule that tentpoles need action. They need that draw, the big, not subtle thing which will make crowds go in droves to see this movie. Gladiator 2 mostly has all of that, and the pacing is quite good. We start with this invasion scene where we see Paul Mescal is living life happily with his baddie wife, and they're happy until boom, the Romans come in and invade and kill everyone, and they take him prisoner. Oh no, now he's trapped. It is a bit rushed, but the movie is still entertaining. The movie does sacrifice a bit of backstory and I guess a bit of emotional heft to make it flow this fast, but more on that later. Anyway, now Paul Mescal has been kidnapped by the Romans and is brought to be a slave where he will fight for his freedom. The general of the Roman army is General Acacius, who is played by Pedro Pascal in a pretty interesting role, where he is conflicted with his role as the general of the Romans. Pedro Pascal doesn't want to be killing innocent people. He has empathy. He doesn't want to enslave citizens and burn their homes to the ground and kill them if they don't comply. He's just afraid for his life as the general, as he serves the two psychotic emperors of Rome, Emperor Caracalla and Emperor Geta, played by Joseph Quinn and Fred Heckinger, who are delightfully gleeful, weird, and freaky and funny villains, who again are underscored by their unpredictability on screen and how they have all this power and are basically just two young guys who don't seem to care about being the rulers of a giant empire at all. They just like watching their slaves fight to death in the Roman gladiatorial arena, which really highlights them as villains. These guys are really bad, but again, like Paul Mescal or like Pedro Pascal, we don't get a ton of backstory on them. And this is a bit of an issue. I do think this movie needed to have a bit more. It needed to be more intense, more depraved. If you're making a movie like Gladiator with these characters who like to just watch people kill each other for fun, I think you should build on their backstories a little more. And it is a little odd to note that this movie was actually originally 4 hours, but they cut lots of scenes to make it into a typical Hollywood 2.5 hours. So I am curious if they kept stuff, the movie would have been better. This movie just has a lot of rumored things, like, these emperors are not ready for power. The youngest brother, it's implied that Fred Heckinger from The White Lotus has syphilis and he's a pet monkey. We don't really get a ton about them, which might have given us some more emotional investment in them. My biggest complaint with this film is while the movie is great and has great spectacle, it sacrifices a lot of character to move the movie along fast and maintain the spectacle. I think if it had included more scenes where we understand Paul's backstory or his relationship with his wife, or even just a couple of flashbacks, we would have felt like he had more depth to him. It includes the bare bones of the story essentials. We know Pedro Pascal is conflicted. We know Paul Mescal wants revenge. We know these two emperors are psychotic and evil and are incompetent rulers. But the movie doesn't do anything more with those simple baselines for its characters. It's a lot of fun to watch, and I do like the increasing stakes. And you go from Paul Mescal fighting a bunch of guys to then fighting monkeys to being transported to Rome to fight in the arena. Even the transport scene is cool when you watch him on the back of a horse pulled carriage as he's brought into the gates of Rome. It feels like a very lived-in world, and I really like that. Then there's rhinos, sharks, and as historically inaccurate as that probably sounds, it's pretty cool. It's just weird that we never get to see Paul Mescal as a leader, as this guy who, when he's fighting gladiators, we can understand that. In the original movie, Maximus Decimus Meridius was a general. Here, they give no backstory to why Paul Mescal is this amazing fighter, and it just feels kind of cheap. Denzel Washington, who I didn't mention yet, is also great in this, one of the standouts. He brings that typical charisma he always carries into his role, and honestly, because of this, he feels like the most fleshed out and believable character. You get his struggle for power, his charm and conspiring nature all have purpose and resonate later in the film, and he's just always entertaining when he's on screen. That's all you could really ask for. The last weak link with this film is how it is a sequel. It's both a really cool thing, but also kind of bogs the film down, where you have this storyline from the first film that gets picked up here, but it doesn't really catch on as well as it should. Now, there's going to be spoilers here, but it shouldn't be if you've seen Gladiator 1. Basically, Paul Mescal is the son of Maximus and Lucilla, who in this film is played by Connie Nielsen, so he's a slave, but his mother is the daughter of the Emperor, played by Richard Harris in the first film. It's funny because Ridley Scott said a big reason he cast Mescal was because of his resemblance to Harris. Anyway, it's kind of a deus ex machina where it's just sort of random, and she recognizes that this man who battles like the man she had sex with and birthed this kid. So she's like, that's my son, he's the Prince of Rome, and she's now married to Pedro Pascal. So they're both kind of afraid of Rome and the emperors who they work for, but she starts conspiring to free her son, who's the rightful Prince of Rome and is now a Roman gladiator. But this doesn't entirely work for several reasons. Paul Mescal's whole motive here is to kill the general, whose troops killed his wife, but he doesn't know that Pedro really doesn't want to be doing this. Eventually, General Pedro and his wife, Paul's mom, conspire to free him, and Pedro is caught, and then Pedro is made to fight Paul. It's Mescal versus Pascal. And it's actually a great moment where you see Lucilla is forced to watch her son and the man she loves fight to death. But it's all just so convoluted, because then Pedro just surrenders, and it's so quick that Paul just forgives him and realizes they're all just pawns of the Roman Empire. The movie just doesn't have enough emotional depth to make this scene truly work. And it sucks because there's really a lot of great stuff at play. It's really cool to see that these two people are fighting who don't want to be fighting, and they have the same mindset, yet they're in this circumstance where they have to. But then the fact that Paul Mescal is just like, oh wait, I won't kill you, Pedro, you actually are nice. It's so jarring to think that his thought process just goes that way immediately. Additionally, the flashbacks where you see how young Lucilla made her son Paul, the Prince of Rome, flee as a boy so he wouldn't be killed just feel so forced and kind of take you out of the story. It's like the movie is holding your hand, explaining it to you, and I do really like a lot of the ideas here about the quest for control, about the cruelty of men and power, about the underdog. At the end of the day, it's an underdog story, but the main guy who you're rooting for just feels kind of empty. He is directed by the plot. He only does any of this because he's captured. He fights because he has to survive and prove himself. He's a gladiator because Denzel recruits him. He doesn't even want to trust his mother, who abandoned him, but then he just does because the plot requires it when she's about to be killed. He's driven by the plot, not by his actions, which kind of lessens the impact here. Compared to the first movie, where Maximus Decimus Meridius, the main character, was a general and the leader of an army. He had all sorts of reasons to fight. He was a warrior by nature and was captured in a big battle by his enemy, so he had plenty of motive to escape and reason to hate the villain. In this, everything is just forced by circumstance. This movie is very entertaining popcorn fare, and I do think you can have it both ways, or sometimes no ways. It's just frustrating that the plot remains so emotionally void, because it makes all the other stuff feel less genuine. It also does annoy me that they show one shot of a tiger. It's kind of an Easter egg to the first film. Why couldn't they bring a tiger out in this one? I don't know. Go big or go home is what I would say. This is a fun movie, but it does sacrifice a great story to kind of make a fast-paced, entertaining blockbuster. So Gladiator 2 is a pretty okay movie. It is fun. I did enjoy it, but I do think it could be a lot better.